Now, do modified cars really have the same appeal as they did back in the day? And I ask this because the landscape of cars has really changed over the past 20 something years, I guess. Now, back in the day, modifications were a big thing. I mean, everyone wanted to modify their cars and put a lot of power into them. I mean, some people put a lot of power into those cars. I think over 800. I heard 1,000 horsepower cars back then, and that was a pretty big deal because you couldn't really access that kind of power. I mean, cars that powerful didn't exist for the manufacturers at that point. I mean, the first 1,000 horsepower car was the Bugatti Veyron. Before that, they had nothing like that. And it was really an interesting time because basically there was no real limit, and each car was individual. It had its own personality, I guess, because one car was 600 horsepower, one was 800, one was 900, and those are all relatively budget cars that you could personally work on and make it your own. And I think it was a great time. But nowadays, I'm not sure because the main thing about those cars back then was the horsepower numbers. And horsepower not really that big of a thing these days because a lot of cars have a lot of power. I mean, it was one thing when no cars had that level of power and you could modify a car to get that power. But now there are over 1,000 horsepower, 1,500 horsepower, almost 2,000 horsepower cars. And even especially after the electric cars came along, I mean, those cars were super powerful. I think that personally changed the game when it comes to horsepower, especially with the Model S Plaid coming from factory with 1,000 horsepower. So when you look at that, is there really a point to modifying cars? And especially since there are a lot of drawbacks to it. Now, the problem with the modified cars is, well, these the cars, you cannot really test those cars out to the maximum and to guarantee that these cars will last forever and without any issues with the engine or the engine breaking or blowing up or stuff like that. And there are limitations. The modified cars, they don't have the R&D that the big car manufacturers put into their cars. I mean, those cars, before the cars come out, the engines are tested for years, I think, through a lot of stuff to make sure those engines are foolproof. And don't get me wrong, those engines still have issues. Some of those engines still have issues when they come out, but for the most part, it isn't that big of a deal. And nowadays, when you have electric cars with 1,000 horsepower, normal cars have much higher horsepower, and those cars, relatively, you can believe that they'll run properly without those high power levels, I mean, horsepower levels. And when you think about that, are the modified cars really worth it? I mean, I hear things about modified cars with 1,000 horsepower these days. You can't do more than a couple of drag races a few or 2 or 3 drag races, and after that the engines kind of have some kind of problem and some issues show up. And the manufactured cars, they don't have those issues. And so yeah, what's the point in making the car that powerful if the engine might have a huge issue, and then after, of course, you're gonna have to spend a lot of money repairing it. And yeah, doesn't really seem all that worth it to be. I mean, don't get me wrong, I actually love those cars, and those cars were iconic, especially the Japanese cars. I mean, apparently those cars were super powerful. I mean, the Supras were really modified and had a lot of power, and everyone loved those cars. They were in the Fast and Furious movies. But these days, they don't have the same appeal. So yeah, I think the age of modifying cars and building up the power is kind of gone. Now, the body kit industry, I think that's still gonna be around for a while, because there's still a lot of room to improve the designs of the cars, and aftermarket body kits are really popular. But I think with the way things are going, we're gonna see manufacturers bringing out their own version of body kits soon. I mean, they are already increased the power of the engines. Now, the body kits are the only thing left, so we'll probably see that soon. But yeah, I think the age of modification is over.